The air in the house was thin and cold. It was the same air that had been there yesterday and the day before, but the warmth had been leached out of it, molecule by molecule, until it was nothing more than a sterile medium for sound to travel through. Alara stood in the center of the living room, a space that had been hers for all of her 18 years, and felt like a trespasser. The floral scent of the funeral lilies had been banished by the aggressive, lemony smell of cleaning products, Richard's work, erasing the final traces of her mother. He sat at the dining room table, a fortress of polished mahogany that had always felt too grand for their small family. Papers were spread before him like a battle plan. He wore a crisp shirt, the top button undone, as if to signal a casual authority he felt he no longer needed to pretend at. He hadn't looked at her, not once, since she had come downstairs. He had only listened for her footsteps, the way a predator listens for prey. "Alara," he said. The name was a flat, hard stone thrown into the silence. She did not answer. She just watched him. She watched the way his fingers, thick and clean, tapped a rhythm on a stack of documents bound in a pale blue folder. He was a man who enjoyed process. He enjoyed the neat and tidy execution of a plan. Her mother's illness had been messy, an unwelcome deviation. This part, the aftermath, was his return to form. "We need to discuss the practicalities," he said, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, empty of light. "Your mother's wishes." Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her mother's wishes had been for more time, for one more summer, for her 18th birthday, which had passed 2 weeks ago in the hushed, antiseptic quiet of a hospital room. "The house," Richard began, tapping the table with a single, decisive finger. "As you know, it's in my name. Always has been. A financial decision we made years ago for tax purposes." She knew. She had never understood it, but she had heard the phrase 100 times. A financial decision. It was the reason he drove a better car, the reason his suits were tailored while her mother bought her clothes on sale. "The savings accounts were joint," he continued, his voice smooth and practiced, like a television lawyer. "With rights of survivorship. That means they revert to me. It's standard." Alara's own small savings account, the one her mother had started for her with birthday money and earnings from a summer job, had been drained to help with medical bills in the final months. Richard had assured her it was a temporary loan. He had promised to replenish it. She looked at his face now, a mask of dispassionate control, and knew the promise had been as hollow as the house felt. "There isn't a will," he said, and for the first time, a flicker of something unpleasant crossed his features. Annoyance. Sarah was sentimental. She never liked to face these things, so legally, intestate succession applies. But since the primary assets were held jointly or in my name, the estate is, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. Insolvent. The word hung in the air, another cold, hard thing. She had nothing. It was that simple. The room, the chair she wanted to sink into, the floor beneath her feet. None of it was hers. She had been a guest here for 18 years, and her stay was over. "I think it's best for everyone to have a clean break," he said, stacking the papers into a neat pile. He was finished. The pronouncement was made. "I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your personal belongings. 1 bag, maybe 2, if you're sensible about it." 1 bag. Her life, the books on her shelves, the worn stuffed bear from her childhood, the photographs of her and her mother laughing on a beach. All of it had to be condensed, curated, reduced to what she could physically carry out the door. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was not just about the money, it was about erasure. He was wiping the slate clean of her, just as he had wiped the house clean of her mother's scent. She finally found her voice, a dry whisper. "Where am I supposed to go?" Richard shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. "You're an adult now, Alara. The world is full of opportunities. You could get a job, Find a roommate. That's what people do. He stood up, the legs of the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound was violent in the stillness. He walked over to a bookshelf, a unit her mother had painstakingly refinished one summer, her hands stained dark with varnish. He pulled out a thick, battered book. Its spine was soft and frayed, the cover stained with fingerprints of flour and oil, her mother's cookbook. It wasn't a single book, but a binder, stuffed with handwritten recipes, clippings from magazines, and notes scrawled on napkins. "She wanted you to have this," he said, holding it out. The gesture was meant to look like a kindness, a final concession, but Alara saw the contempt in his eyes. He was handing her a collection of worthless paper, a final reminder of the domestic world her mother had occupied, a world he had always disdained. It was a joke, a final insult. She took the book. Its weight was familiar in her hands. It smelled of vanilla and thyme and her mother's skin. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the sudden, crushing weight of her grief. She clutched the book to her chest, a shield against the vast emptiness of the room. He seemed satisfied. He had performed his duty, passed on the sentimental heirloom. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing on the stairs, leaving her alone with the silence and the smell of lemon polish. Alara stood there for a long time. Then, mechanically, she went upstairs to her room. She pulled a duffel bag from the back of her closet and began the impossible task of choosing the pieces of her life she was allowed to keep. Each object was a memory, each memory a fresh wound. The small silver locket her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, a worn paperback of her favorite novel, a photo of them at the zoo, squinting into the sun. She packed methodically, numbly. When the bag was full, she sat on her bed and opened the cookbook. She didn't know why. Maybe just to feel something of her mother that Richard hadn't been able to scrub away. She flipped through the pages, seeing her mother's elegant, sloping handwriting. A recipe for lasagna with a note. Alara's favorite. A diagram for a perfect pie crust. She turned to a page for hearty winter stew. The paper was thick and stained, a veteran of many cold evenings. Taped to the center of the page was a key. It was an old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, nothing like the modern keys for the house. Beneath it, in her mother's script, was a short, cryptic note. "For when you need a place to be warm." Alara stared at it. A place to be warm. It was exactly what she needed. On the back of the recipe card, tucked into the plastic sleeve, was an address. It was across town, in a neighborhood she didn't recognize, a part of the city map that was all gray industrial parks and tangled railway lines. Was this another of Richard's cruel jokes? Had he planted it there? No. The handwriting was undeniably her mother's. This was a secret she had kept, a small, hidden thing in a life that had seemed so transparent. A flicker of something. Not hope, it was too fragile for that, but something other than despair sparked in her chest. A key, a door, a place. It was more than she'd had a minute ago. She carefully peeled the tape off the page and slipped the key into her pocket. It felt heavy. It felt real. She zipped the cookbook into the front pocket of her duffel bag. She had her one bag, her book of recipes, and a key to an unknown door. It wasn't a plan. It was just a direction. It was enough. The next day, she left. She walked out the front door without looking back, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The house already felt like a stranger's. Richard was somewhere inside, probably already choosing new paint colors. She didn't care. She was walking toward a mystery, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest pull of the future. The bus ride was long and jarring. It carried her away from the manicured lawns and quiet, tree-lined streets of her childhood and plunged her into the city's gritty, functional heart. The farther she went, the more the landscape changed. Residential houses gave way to strip malls, then to low-slung commercial buildings, and finally to vast, anonymous warehouses with corrugated metal walls and fences topped with barbed wire. She got off at a stop that was little more than a signpost on a crumbling sidewalk. The air smelled of diesel fumes and damp concrete. The address from the recipe card led her down a street that wasn't really a street at all, but a service road running behind a row of silent, imposing warehouses. Weeds grew in thick clumps through cracks in the asphalt. There were no people, no cars, just the low hum of distant machinery and the lonely cry of a gull circling overhead. She checked the number again, scrawled on the back of the card. This was the place. But there was nothing here, just the blank, windowless back of another warehouse. Her heart sank. A wild goose chase, a fantasy, a cruel trick of a grieving mind. She was about to turn back, to give in to the crushing despair, when she saw it. Tucked between two hulking warehouses, almost completely obscured by a curtain of overgrown ivy, was a narrow alley, and at the end of the alley, set back from the road, was a small, freestanding structure. It was a garage, or maybe a workshop. It was made of old, weathered brick, with a wide, sliding door made of wood that had been bleached gray by the sun. The roof sagged in the middle, and several windows were boarded over with splintered plywood. A thick, gnarled vine had wrapped itself around one corner of the building, its tendrils reaching up to the roofline as if trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. It looked abandoned, condemned. This was it? This was her mother's secret? A derelict shack in a forgotten industrial wasteland? The flicker of hope she had nurtured died, leaving a cold ash in her gut. It was a money pit, a ruin, worse than nothing. It was a burden, a physical manifestation of her own broken, hopeless state. She walked down the alley, her footsteps crunching on loose gravel. The air was still and close. As she got nearer, she saw the padlock on the sliding door. It was old and rusted, but it looked heavy, formidable. With a trembling hand, she pulled the brass key from her pocket. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to turn around and walk away, to forget she had ever seen this place, to leave this final, sad secret of her mother's buried under the ivy. But where would she go? Back to the bus stop? Back to nowhere? She slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, gritty with rust and disuse. She jiggled it, pushed harder, and then, with a sharp, grating click, the mechanism turned. The shackle sprang open. The sound was loud in the silence. The sliding door was heavy. She had to put her shoulder into it, straining against the years of neglect. It moved with a deep, groaning screech of metal on metal, opening just enough for her to slip through. She stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old things. Not rot, not decay, but something else entirely. It was the clean, sharp smell of sawdust, the rich, metallic tang of linseed oil, the faint, earthy perfume of clay, and underneath it all, a lingering floral note, like dried lavender. It was the smell of work, of creation. Dust motes swirled in the single beam of light that pierced the gloom from a crack in the boarded-up window. The space was cavernous, larger than she had expected. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, the shapes of things began to emerge from the shadows. Against the far wall, a massive workbench stood, its surface scarred and stained from years of use. Above it, a pegboard covered the wall, and on it, hanging in perfect, obsessive order, was a collection of tools, handsaws of every size, their teeth still sharp, a row of chisels, their wooden handles worn smooth, hammers, mallets, planes, and drills. Around each tool, a faint outline had been drawn on the board, a ghost image showing exactly where it belonged. In the center of the room, draped in a dusty canvas cloth, was a shape. Alara walked toward it, her boots silent on the concrete floor. She reached out and pulled the cloth away. It was a chair, a half-finished wooden armchair. The frame was assembled, but the seat was missing. She ran her hand along the curve of one of the arms. The wood was smooth as silk, sanded to a perfect finish. She looked closer, at the point where the arm joined the back leg. It was a joint she had never seen before, a complex, interlocking puzzle of wood, fitted together so perfectly there seemed to be no seam at all. There were no nails, no screws, just wood, shaped and joined with breathtaking skill. On the workbench, next to a set of intricate schematics, lay a block of wood and a chisel. A few fresh curls of pale pine lay beside it, as if the work had been interrupted only moments ago. This was her mother's. This was her mother's secret life. Alara sank onto a nearby stool, overwhelmed. Her mother, Sarah, the quiet accountant who balanced ledgers and made casseroles. The woman who wore sensible shoes and floral blouses. That woman had done this. She had wielded these tools. She had designed this chair. She had created this sanctuary, this world of sawdust and precision, hidden away from everyone. The despair that had gripped her in the alley evaporated, replaced by a profound and dizzying sense of awe. She was not in a ruin. She was in a temple, and she had just been given the key. The place wasn't a burden. It was a legacy. She looked around the workshop, at the ordered tools, the sturdy bench, the patient, half-finished chair. A thing isn't ruined, a voice in her head whispered, her mother's voice. If the bones are good. She looked at the walls, the roof. Sagging, yes. Leaking, probably. But the brick walls looked solid. The main beams overhead were thick and true. The bones were good. She stood up. There was so much dust, so much grime, so much work to do. She found a broom leaning against the wall, its bristles stiff but intact. She started in one corner and began to sweep. The rhythmic scrape of the broom on the concrete was a comforting sound. It was the sound of a beginning. Each stroke cleared away a layer of neglect, revealing the solid floor beneath. It was a small act, but it was hers. Progress. Small, but real. She worked for hours, losing track of time, lost in the simple, physical task. She swept the floors. She wiped down the workbench. She gently dusted each tool, her fingers tracing the worn handles, feeling the ghost of her mother's grip. This was more than a place. It was a story, and she was standing on the first page. When dusk began to settle, painting the single beam of light in shades of orange and purple, she realized she was starving. She had no food, no water, nothing but the clothes she wore and the contents of her duffel bag. The workshop was a sanctuary, but it wasn't yet a home. She needed supplies. She slid the heavy door closed, refastened the padlock, and walked back out of the alley. The industrial street seemed less menacing now. It was just a place, and she had a place within it. She remembered passing a small, brightly lit storefront a few blocks back, an anachronism among the warehouses, a corner store. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, old-fashioned tune as she entered. The air inside was warm and smelled of coffee, floor wax, and cardboard boxes. The shelves were packed tight with a little bit of everything: canned goods, bread, milk, hardware, and candy jars. It was a relic from another time, a place that ran on trust and familiarity. Behind the counter, an elderly woman with a cloud of white hair and bright, inquisitive eyes was wiping down the countertop. She looked up as Alara entered, and her movements stilled. Her gaze was sharp, taking in Alara's dusty clothes, her tired face, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "Well now," the woman said, her voice raspy but kind. "Lost, are you, dear?" "No," Alara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm looking for some cleaning supplies, and maybe some bread." The woman's eyes crinkled at the corners. She tilted her head. "You've been in the old workshop. The brick one at the end of the service road. Got that smell on you. Sawdust and time." Alara nodded, a little stunned. "Yes. How did you know?" "Lived here 50 years, the woman said, gesturing around the shop. "This was my husband's place. It's mine now. I know everything that happens on this block. Not much does, so it's easy to keep track. Haven't seen anyone go in there for, it must be months now. Not since Sarah stopped coming by. The name hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. Sarah? You knew my mother? The woman's face softened completely. The inquisitive look was replaced by one of deep, sad recognition. Oh, you're her girl. Of course you are. You have her eyes. That same serious look. I'm Martha Gable. Most folks just call me Mrs. Gable. She rounded the counter, her movement surprisingly brisk, and took one of Alara's hands in her own. Her skin was dry and papery, but her grip was firm. Your mother, she said, her voice dropping lower. She was a good soul. Quiet. So quiet. She used to come in here after she was done at the workshop. Always the same order. Black coffee, a bar of that harsh soap with the pumice in it for getting the grease off, and sometimes a pastry, if I'd just baked. Tears pricked at Alara's eyes. She had 1,000 questions, 1,000,000, but they were all stuck in her throat. Mrs. Gable seemed to understand. She led Alara to a small stool by the counter and bustled off. You sit. You look like you could fall over. I'll make you a sandwich. Alara didn't protest. She sat, feeling the exhaustion of the last few days settle deep into her bones. Mrs. Gable worked quickly, slicing thick bread, layering ham and cheese. She talked as she worked, her voice a soothing balm. Your mother loved that place, she said. She called it her sanctuary. She'd come here, after work, you know. She'd have her work clothes in her car, a pair of overalls and some steel-toed boots. She'd change and go in there, and sometimes she wouldn't come out until after dark. She was a different person when she was here. Straighter back, a clearer eye. That man she was married to. Richard. Mrs. Gable said the name like it was something foul. He came by here once, looking for her, drove up in his fancy car, wearing a suit that cost more than my weekly earnings. He asked me if I'd seen his wife, said she was probably off playing with her little toys. Belittling. Nasty. I told him I hadn't seen her all day. She was in the workshop, of course. I could hear her plane humming. After he left, she came in and thanked me. We didn't talk about it. We never did. But we understood. A sandwich, wrapped in wax paper, appeared in front of Alara, and a glass of milk. She ate, the simple food tasting like the most delicious meal she had ever had. Mrs. Gable watched her, a sad, knowing smile on her face. She was building something in there, Alara said between bites. A chair, and more. I think she was building more. She was always building, Mrs. Gable nodded. Brought me a new set of shelves for the canned goods last year. Didn't ask for a penny. Said her old ones were sagging. She was right. The joinery on them, a work of art. My husband was a carpenter. He would have been impressed. She had the gift. The gift. Her mother had a gift that Alara had never known, never been allowed to see. Richard had hidden it, shamed it into a secret life in a dusty garage. The anger she felt was cold and clean, a clarifying force. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a fierce, protective love for the woman she was only now beginning to meet. She was so proud of you, Mrs. Gable said softly. She didn't talk much, but when she talked about you, her whole face would light up. Showed me your picture once. Graduation photo from middle school. Kept it in her wallet. Alara finished the sandwich and the milk. She felt stronger, more solid. The food was part of it, but the stories were the real nourishment. They were filling in the empty spaces, rebuilding her image of her mother, making her whole again. I'm staying there, Alara said, the decision forming into words as she spoke them. In the workshop. I'm going to fix it up. Mrs. Gable didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly. It's a good place. Strong bones. Sarah always said that. "The bones are good," she'd say. Alara's breath caught. The same words. "Here," Mrs. Gable said, turning away and filling a paper bag with essentials: a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a bottle of water, soap, a fresh sponge. "You take this. No arguments. We'll work it out later. Sarah's girl is not going hungry on my watch." Alara tried to protest, to offer the little cash she had, but Mrs. Gable waved her off. "You'll need your money for other things. Now go on. Get some rest. It's been a long day. But come back tomorrow. I'll have coffee on." Alara walked back to the workshop with the bag of groceries in her arms. The weight was comforting. The alley was dark, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt like a pathway home. Inside, she laid out a sleeping bag she'd packed, its familiar scent a small comfort in the vast, strange space. Before she fell asleep, under the watchful eyes of the silent, ordered tools, she thought about her mother, not the sick, fading woman in the hospital bed, but the strong, capable woman with sawdust in her hair, a secret sanctuary, and a friend who kept her secret safe. The next morning, Alara woke with the sun. Light streamed through the cracks in the boards, striping the dusty floor. The air was cold, but the chill was invigorating. She had a purpose. Fueled by peanut butter sandwiches and a fierce new energy, she started to clean. It was a monumental task. Years of accumulated dust and grime covered every surface. She started with the windows, prying off the old plywood boards. One by one, she let the light in. The glass was thick with dirt, but behind the filth, it was intact. She scrubbed them with her sponge and soap, and slowly, the cavernous space began to fill with a soft, diffuse light. The light revealed everything: the scale of the work ahead, but also the hidden beauty of the place. The brick walls were solid and true. The massive wooden beams overhead were hand-hewn, notched together with the same precision as the chair. This place hadn't just been built, it had been crafted. As she worked, she felt a growing sense of connection to her mother. She imagined her here, in this space, planning, measuring, cutting. The workshop was an extension of her, a physical manifestation of her mind. Cleaning it felt like an act of care, of tending to her mother's legacy. While clearing out a pile of old canvas tarps near the workbench, her foot hit a loose floorboard. It wasn't obvious. The seam was almost invisible, but it shifted under her weight with a hollow sound. Curiosity piqued. She knelt and worked her fingers into the crack. The board lifted easily. Beneath it was a small, recessed compartment, and nestled inside was a gray metal box, the kind used for cash or important documents. It was locked, but the key was taped to the lid. Her mother's meticulous planning, even in her secrets. Alara's heart pounded. Money? Valuables? A will that Richard hadn't found? She unlocked the box and lifted the lid. It wasn't filled with money. It was filled with notebooks. There were 5 of them, standard-issue composition books with black and white marbled covers. They were worn, their corners soft, their pages full. She lifted the top one out. On the cover, in her mother's familiar script, was a single phrase: "The Cabin Project." She opened it. The first page was a beautifully rendered architectural drawing of the workshop, but not as it was. It was transformed. A small, efficient living space was sketched into the floor plan. A loft for a bed, a compact kitchen along one wall, a tiny but functional bathroom tucked into a corner. The rest of the space was preserved as a workshop. She turned the page, and another. The notebooks were a complete record of her mother's vision. They were part journal, part instruction manual. There were detailed schematics for plumbing and electrical systems. There were lists of materials, calculations of board feet, and notes on building codes. Woven between the technical drawings and calculations were personal entries. October 12th. Richard laughed at me today. He said I was wasting my time with my little hobby. He doesn't understand. This isn't a hobby. It's a lifeboat. Every screw I drive, every board I cut, is a step away from him, a step toward a life where I can breathe. November 3rd. Found the perfect sink at a salvage yard. A deep porcelain basin. It's heavy as sin, but it will be beautiful. Mrs. Gable helped me get it into the truck. She didn't ask why I needed a sink. She just smiled and said it had good bones. December 1st. Thinking of Alara today. She loves the rain. I need to make sure the roof is perfect. No leaks. I want her to be able to sleep here and hear the rain on a metal roof and feel safe. Completely safe. Alara read for hours, sitting on the dusty floor, the metal box open beside her. She devoured the notebooks, one after another. They were a map of her mother's heart. They revealed a woman of incredible strength, foresight, and a deep, fierce, practical love. The quiet, submissive wife Alara had known was a role she played. The real Sarah lived here, in these pages, among the sawdust and the schematics. The cabin project wasn't just a dream. It was a plan, an escape plan. Her mother had been building a new life for them, a small, safe world within these brick walls. And she had left Alara the blueprints. The grief returned, sharp and sudden, but different this time. It was mingled with an immense, aching pride. Her mother hadn't given up. She had fought, quietly, secretly, with a hammer and a saw and a brilliant, methodical mind. She just ran out of time. If you've made it this far into Alara's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Alara closed the last notebook. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the workshop. The space no longer felt empty. It felt full of her mother's presence, her intentions, her unwavering love. She wasn't just fixing up an old garage. She was finishing her mother's work. She was completing the lifeboat. The next day, she woke with a new resolve. The journals were her guide. She had a purpose. She started with the first task her mother had detailed. Phase 1. Secure the envelope. It began with the roof. The journals contained a detailed sketch of the roof structure and a list of materials needed for the repair. Asphalt shingles, roofing felt, flashing, and a bucket of tar for the seams. She made a list, her handwriting a shaky imitation of her mother's neat script. Then she counted the money in her wallet. It was barely enough for a fraction of what she needed. The notebook had another entry on the materials page. Henderson's Hardware. See Tom. He gives a fair price. Tell him Sarah sent you. He'll understand. Henderson's Hardware was a short walk from Mrs. Gable's store. It was a proper, old-school hardware store, the kind that smelled of metal, fertilizer, and fresh-cut keys. The aisles were narrow and crammed with everything from plumbing fixtures to paint cans. A gruff-looking man in his 60s, with a pencil behind his ear and a canvas apron covered in dust, stood behind the counter, arguing with a customer about the merits of different types of wood glue. This had to be Tom Henderson. Alara waited patiently. When the customer left, she approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Tom Henderson?" He looked at her, his expression neutral, guarded. "I am. What can I do for you?" "My name is Alara. My mother was Sarah. She wrote that I should come see you." The man's gruff exterior cracked. His eyes, a surprisingly light blue, widened slightly. He leaned forward on the counter, studying her face. "Sarah's daughter. I'll be damned." He was quiet for a moment. "I was sorry to hear about her passing. She was a good one of the best." "You knew her well?" Alara asked. "Knew her work," he corrected, tapping a finger on the counter. "She'd come in here, knew exactly what she wanted, knew more about wood and tools than half the contractors I deal with. Quiet, but sharp as a tack. Last year, my big band saw went down. The motor seized up. Repair guy quoted me a fortune, said it would take a week. Your mother came in, saw me fuming. She just looked at it, asked for a wrench and a screwdriver. Took the whole damn thing apart on the floor right here. Had it running in 2 hours. Found a piece of stray metal that had gotten sucked into the housing. Didn't want to take a dime for it. Said a good tool deserved to be working. He shook his head, a look of genuine respect on his face. So, yeah, I knew her. What do you need, kid? Alara pulled out her list. I'm fixing up her workshop. The roof is first. He glanced at the list and whistled softly. That's a job. You know how to do this stuff? I have her notes, Alara said simply. That seemed to be enough for him. He nodded. All right, let's see what we've got. He led her through the aisles, pulling materials, explaining the difference between types of flashing, showing her how to get a good seal with the tar. He treated her not as a grieving child, but as a fellow builder. When they got back to the counter, he tallied up the cost. The number made Alara's stomach clench. It was more than she had. I don't have all of that right now, she admitted, her face flushing with embarrassment. Mr. Henderson looked at her, then at the total. He was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, and a new entry on his old-fashioned register. Tell you what, he said. I need help around here. Sweeping up, stocking shelves, unloading deliveries. It's heavy work, but it's honest. You come in, work for me 20 hours a week. I'll pay you a fair wage, and I'll set you up with an account. You can take the materials you need. Pay it off as you go. Sarah's credit is good here. Alara was speechless. A job, a way to get the materials, a lifeline. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me, he grumbled, though his eyes were kind. Pay your bills on time and don't be late for work. Your first shift is tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Now let's get this stuff loaded into the truck. I'll give you a hand getting it over to the workshop. The work was the hardest thing she had ever done. Mr. Henderson had been right. It was heavy and dirty, but it was honest. She swept sawdust, organized bins of screws and nails, and helped unload pallets of concrete bags. Her muscles ached in ways she never knew they could, but at the end of each day, she would go back to the workshop, her body tired, but her mind clear, and she would work on the roof. She followed her mother's notes to the letter. She stripped the old, cracked shingles, her hands raw and blistered. She patched the sheathing underneath. She rolled out the heavy black roofing felt, its tarry smell sharp in the cool air. She learned the rhythm of the hammer, the satisfying thwack of a nail driven true. Mrs. Gable would bring her dinner most evenings, a hot casserole, a thick soup, a thermos of coffee. She would sit on a stool and watch Alara work, offering quiet encouragement. She never offered advice, just a steady, supportive presence. One evening, as Alara was wrestling with a piece of metal flashing, a stooped, elderly man appeared in the open doorway. He was holding a toolbox. "You Sarah's girl?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Alara nodded, wary. "Name's Davies," he said. "I'm an electrician. Retired now. Your mother rewired a lamp for my wife, an antique. No one else would touch it. Did it for a song. I heard from Tom Henderson you were trying to bring this place back to life. Saw your light on. Your mother's notes on the wiring in here. They're good. But it's old wiring. You ought to let me take a look before you close up the walls." And so he did. For the next week, Mr. Davies came every day. He helped her trace the old circuits, replaced frayed wires, and installed new, safe outlets. He taught her how to read a schematic, how to test a connection, how to respect the power she was harnessing. He, too, shared stories of her mother, of her precision, her patience, her quiet competence. The community of her mother's secret life was slowly, surely becoming hers. A plumber, a friend of Henderson's, came by to inspect the old pipes and helped her roughen the lines for the new bathroom, showing her how to sweat a copper joint until it shone. A woman who ran a local laundromat dropped off a box of old, clean curtains, saying Sarah had once fixed her rattling dryer and never took payment. Each person was a thread, weaving a new tapestry of family around her. They were bound together by their shared respect for the woman who had touched their lives with her quiet acts of service. They saw that same spirit in Alara, in her dogged determination, in the way she honored her mother's work. A stray cat, a skinny calico with one torn ear, started appearing at the door. It was wary at first, but Alara left out a saucer of milk, the way Mrs. Gable said her mother used to. Soon the cat was a permanent resident, a silent, watchful companion, often curling up to sleep on a pile of sawdust, a living link to the workshop's past. Alara named her Patches. Months passed. Autumn gave way to the first chills of winter. The workshop was transformed. The roof was solid and watertight. The walls were insulated and paneled with smooth, pale birch plywood. The small kitchen had a working sink and a 2-burner hot plate. The bathroom had a toilet and a small shower stall. In the loft space above the main floor, a mattress on a simple wooden frame waited. It was a home. Her home. She had built it. She was finishing the last of the trim work one afternoon, the scent of fresh-cut pine filling the air, when a sleek, dark car pulled up outside the alley. Alara's stomach tightened. She recognized the car. It was Richard's. He got out, looking absurdly out of place in his expensive wool coat against the gritty backdrop of the warehouses. He walked down the alley, his expression a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. He stopped at the open door of the workshop and stared inside. His eyes widened in disbelief. He took in the clean, organized space, the new walls, the kitchen, the soft light filtering through the clean windows. He saw not a ruin, but a beautifully crafted tiny home, and his mind, which saw everything in terms of monetary value, started calculating. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What have you done here?" "It's my home," Alara said. Her voice was calm, steady. She was not the frightened girl he had thrown out of his house. She was standing on her own ground, surrounded by the work of her own hands. "Your home?" he scoffed, stepping inside, his expensive shoes leaving marks on the clean floor. "This is a commercial property. You're squatting. I had a call from an old business associate who saw lights on over here. I had no idea." He ran a hand along the smooth kitchen counter. "You've put some money into this place." "I put work into it," she corrected. "Work, money, it's the same thing," he said dismissively. He circled the space, his eyes darting everywhere, assessing. "This property, it must have been an undeclared asset of the marriage, which means, as Sarah's surviving spouse, it belongs to me. Half of it, at the very least." He smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "In fact, given that you've been living here without my permission, I could have you removed. But I'm a reasonable man. You've done some nice work here. Improve the value. I'll overlook the trespassing. You can pack your things. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork to take possession." Alara felt a cold fury rise in her, but she kept her voice even. She had been preparing for this moment. She had known he would come as soon as he smelled money. She walked over to the workbench, where the gray metal box now sat. She opened it and took out a folded, official-looking document. "You might want to see this first," she said, holding it out to him. He snatched it from her hand. It was the deed to the property. He scanned it, his eyes moving quickly. His smile faltered. He read it again, slower this time. The color drained from his face. "This is dated 12 years ago," he whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. "That's right," Alara said. "She bought it before she ever met you." "The name," he stammered. "It's in her maiden name, Sarah Jensen." "Her name," Alara said, her voice like ice. "The one that was hers and hers alone. This workshop, this land, it was never part of your marriage. It was never part of your estate. It was always hers. And now, it's mine. She left it to me." He stared at the paper, then at her. The mask of control was gone. In its place was pure, sputtering rage. He saw his prize, the unexpected windfall, slipping through his fingers. He saw her, the girl he had cast aside as worthless, standing before him, powerful and secure. He had been outmaneuvered by a ghost. This is fraud," he sputtered, waving the deed. "She hid this from me." "She kept it safe from you," Alara corrected. "Now, I think you should leave." He looked around the workshop one last time, his face a mask of thwarted greed. He crumpled slightly, defeated. He threw the deed onto the floor. "Keep your hovel," he spat. "It's worthless anyway." He turned and stormed out, his angry footsteps echoing in the alley until the sound of his car engine roared to life and then faded into the distance. Alara bent down and picked up the deed. She smoothed it out carefully. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the vibration of victory. She had stood her ground. She had protected her mother's legacy. She was safe. She walked over to the window and watched the winter sky darken. The workshop was silent, save for the gentle purr of Patches, who had woken up and was now rubbing against her leg. Alara reached down and stroked the cat's soft fur. The house held. She had held. They were safe. A few weeks later, another visitor appeared. This one did not arrive in a fancy car. He came on foot, looking hesitant and worn. It was Mark, Richard's son from a previous marriage. Alara had never been close to him. He was a quiet, nervous boy who had always seemed to be trying to make himself smaller in his father's imposing presence. He looked older now and tired. "Alara," he said, hovering in the doorway. Can I talk to you for a minute?" She nodded, gesturing for him to come in. He stepped inside, looking around in the same awe Richard had, but with something else in his eyes. Not greed, but a kind of sad wonder. "This is incredible," he said softly. "What you've done here." "It's what my mother started," she said. He looked down at his shoes. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For what happened, for what my father did. I stood there. I didn't say anything. I was a coward. I've been a coward my whole life." He looked up, and she saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "He's not doing well. The business venture he was counting on fell through. He lost everything. The house, the car, all of it. He's living in a small rental, and he's broken." There was no triumph in his voice, only a weary sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that," Alara said, and she found that she meant it. She felt no satisfaction in Richard's downfall, only a distant pity. "I'm not," Mark said with a flash of bitterness. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm leaving town, going to try and start over somewhere he isn't. But before I went, I wanted to, I don't know, do something. Is there anything you need? Anything I can do to help?" He looked around the nearly finished space. "I'm not much of a carpenter, but I'm strong." Alara looked at him. He was not his father. He was just a young man trying to escape a long shadow. She thought of her mother's quiet acts of service, of the community that had rallied around her. She looked toward the front of the workshop, where a simple, unfinished stoop of concrete blocks served as a temporary step. Her mother's journal had a detailed plan for a proper wooden porch with 2 steps and a railing. It was the last major project. "The porch," she said. "I was about to start building the front porch." Mark nodded, a look of relief on his face. "Okay," he said. "Show me what to do." For 3 days they worked together. Alara, using her mother's plans, directed him. She showed him how to measure and cut the boards, how to drill the pilot holes, how to sink the bolts into the foundation. He was a clumsy apprentice, but he was a tireless worker. He dug the post holes, he mixed the concrete. He held the heavy beams in place while she secured them. They didn't talk much, but in the shared language of physical work, a quiet understanding grew. He was atoning, in the only way he knew how. When they were done, a small, sturdy porch stood at the entrance to the workshop. It was simple but beautifully made. It looked like it had always been there. "Thank you," Mark said, wiping sweat from his forehead, though the air was cold. "For letting me do this." "Thank you for the help," Elara replied. He lingered for a moment, then gave her a small, sad smile. "Good luck, Elara." He turned and walked away down the alley, not looking back. She never saw him again. That evening, Elara sat on her new porch, a mug of hot tea warming her hands. The final piece was in place. The cabin was complete. She went back inside to put her tools away, a satisfying ritual that marked the end of the day's work. She picked up the last of her mother's notebooks, the one she had been using for the porch design, intending to place it back in the metal box. As she closed the cover, her fingers brushed against something tucked into the back pocket. It was a sealed envelope, the paper thick and creamy. Her name was written on the front in her mother's hand. Her breath caught in her throat. She had been through these notebooks 100 times. How had she never seen it? It had been tucked so deeply, so intentionally, waiting to be found only when the work was truly done. She sat down at the workbench, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. Patches jumped into her lap, a warm, purring weight. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, filled with her mother's dense, elegant script. "My dearest Elara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone. And for that, my darling girl, I am more sorry than words can ever say. My greatest regret is that I ran out of time. The second thing it means is that you found my sanctuary. You found the cabin project. You found this letter. And that means you are strong and clever, and you are a survivor." I never doubted it for a moment. "There are things I need to tell you. Things I was waiting to say until your 18th birthday. I was going to give you this letter then, along with a key. We were supposed to leave together. The story you know of my life is not the whole story. I didn't marry Richard for love. I married him for security, or what I thought was security. I was young, and alone, and scared. Your father, my first husband, he was a good man, a kind man, but he was taken from me too soon. I was left with nothing but you, a beautiful baby girl. Richard offered stability. I took the deal. It was the biggest mistake of my life. He was not a cruel man, not at first. But he was a man who needed to be in control. He controlled the money, the house, my life. And he chipped away at me, piece by piece, with his dismissals, his belittling of my hobbies, his contempt for anything that wasn't about money or status. I grew smaller and smaller in his world, but I never let him touch the part of me that was truly mine, the part that knew how to build things. This workshop was my rebellion. I bought it with the last of the inheritance from my own mother, long before I met Richard. I kept it secret. It was the one place he couldn't touch, the one place I could be whole. And I started to build. At first, it was just for me, a place to breathe. But then, as you grew, I saw the way he looked at you, the same dismissiveness, the same faint contempt for your quiet, artistic soul, and I knew I couldn't let him do to you what he had done to me. So the cabin project became our escape plan. I saved every spare dollar. I learned everything I could about construction, plumbing, wiring. I was building us a fortress, a new life where we could be free. The plan was simple. On your 18th birthday, we were going to pack a bag, come here, and never go back. It wasn't much, this little space, but it was going to be ours. The illness came too fast. There was no time. But know this, Elara. My quietness was not submission. It was strategy. My frugality was not weakness. It was funding our escape. Every moment I spent away from you in this workshop, I was building your future. Elara had to stop reading. Tears were streaming down her face, blurring the words. Her mother hadn't been a victim. She had been a warrior, fighting a long, secret war for their freedom. The grief she felt was immense, but it was clean, purified by the fire of this revelation. The years of confusion, of wondering why her mother stayed, why she endured Richard's quiet cruelty, it was all recontextualized. It wasn't acceptance. It was a sacrifice. She wiped her eyes and continued reading. There is one more thing. I have a sister. Your aunt, Caroline. Richard drove a wedge between us years ago, convinced me that she looked down on me, on our life. He is very good at isolating people. I have not spoken to her in over a decade, one of my other great regrets. But she is good people, Alara. She is like me. She has strong hands and a good heart. I don't know if she will want to see you, but you should know she exists. She lives in Oregon. The address is on the back of this letter. Tell her I was a fool to listen to him. Tell her I loved her. Be safe, my darling girl. Live in this house we built. Be brave. Be free. Fill this space with light and love and the smell of sawdust, and know that every moment of my life, I loved you more than you could possibly imagine. All my love, forever, Mom. Alara folded the letter, her hands trembling. She held it to her chest, the thin paper a direct conduit to her mother's heart. She finally understood. Everything. The secret workshop, the key, the notebooks. It was all a final, desperate, brilliant act of a mother's love. It wasn't a legacy of grief. It was an inheritance of strength. She looked around the beautiful, finished space, the warm glow of the single lamp over the workbench, the moonlight streaming through the clean windows, the quiet, rhythmic purr of the cat. This was not just a house. It was the physical manifestation of her mother's love. The next day, she bought a single sheet of nice stationery from Mrs. Gable's store. She sat at her workbench and wrote a letter to the address in Oregon. She didn't ask for anything. She just told her aunt what had happened. She told her about Sarah's illness, about Richard, about being dispossessed. And then she told her about the workshop, about the notebooks, the plans, and the final letter. She told her that her mother had loved her and regretted the silence between them. Sending the letter was a cathartic act. She didn't know if she would get a response. It didn't matter. She had closed a circle. She had honored her mother's last wish. She was taking control of her own story, reconnecting the lines that had been broken. Winter settled over the city. The first snow fell, blanketing the grimy industrial park in a layer of pristine white. Inside the workshop, Alara was warm and safe. The small space held the heat beautifully. She had a routine. She worked her shifts at Henderson's Hardware, learning the trade. Her account now paid in full and a small savings growing. In the evenings, she worked in her own shop. She finished the chair her mother had started, its joints as perfect as she could make them. She started taking on small commissions, a set of bookshelves for Mrs. Gable, a repaired table for Mr. Davies. Her mother's tools, once a mystery, were now familiar extensions of her own hands. The workshop was no longer just a living space. It was alive with purpose. It was a business, her business. One crisp spring morning, she sat on the porch, drinking her coffee. The garden she had planted in a series of wooden boxes along the alley was beginning to show green shoots. Patches was sunning herself on the railing. The air was clean and cool. Alara felt a deep, quiet sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the giddy happiness she had once thought was the goal of life. It was something better, something solid, a feeling of being rooted, of belonging to a place and to herself. The simple brass bell she had installed on the doorframe gave a soft chime. A young woman stood there, no older than Alara herself. She was clutching a worn backpack, her eyes wide and scared, the way Alara's had been all those months ago. "I'm sorry to bother you," the young woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Gable, from the store. She sent me. She said you might be able to help. I just need a place to stay, just for a night or two, until I can figure things out." Elara looked at her frightened eyes, her thin jacket, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. She saw herself in the girl, the same lost, dispossessed look. She looked back into her workshop. The warm light spilled out from the doorway. The scent of coffee and sawdust filled the air. It was a sanctuary. It was built to be a sanctuary. Her mother had built a lifeboat for two. Now it was time to welcome another passenger aboard. Elara smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. She stepped back and held the door wider. "The door was open," she said. "Come on in."